The morning light spilled through the thin curtains, painting the room in pale gold, and yet it brought no comfort. I lay in the unfamiliar softness of the sheets, feeling the unfamiliar weight of my blouse against my chest, the subtle brush of the skirt against my thighs. Every muscle in my body seemed taut, coiled like a spring, yet simultaneously hollowed out, drained of the usual certainty that had anchored me for years. I knew she had been watching me the night before, guiding, directing, shaping me, and now I could feel her influence everywhere, lingering like perfume in the air. The thought made my stomach twist and my heartbeat spike, but it was not fear alone. It was something I could not name, a mixture of anticipation, shame, and curiosity that settled over me like a heavy, invisible blanket. I rose slowly, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed, and felt the slight friction of the stockings along my calves. Each movement, once automatic and unthinking, now carried a weight of self-consciousness. I caught my reflection in the dresser mirror and froze. My face had changed overnight, or perhaps it was only that I was seeing it differently now. My eyes seemed wider, softer, almost searching, and the faint blush she had coaxed onto my cheeks lingered, giving me the appearance of someone delicate and fragile. My hair fell in loose curls over my shoulders, a style she had orchestrated with careful patience, and the way it framed my jaw made the familiar lines of my face appear entirely new. I sat at the edge of the bed, clutching the small purse she had placed in my hands yesterday, and wondered how I was supposed to inhabit this version of myself. She had not demanded this overnight. The change had been gradual, subtle, a series of small, almost imperceptible nudges. And yet, now I was here, fully clothed in her choices, feeling both exposed and strangely alive. My fingers traced the seams of the blouse, the gentle texture of the fabric, and I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. When I heard her footsteps in the hallway, my pulse jumped. She entered the room with the calm certainty that had always unnerved me. Her eyes scanned me quickly, assessing, approving, measuring. "Good," she said softly. "You're learning to move differently, aren't you?" Her words were not a question. They were an observation, a subtle recognition of my slow, uncertain progress. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight, and felt an unexpected surge of something I had never felt before, vulnerability. Not shame exactly, but the acute awareness that my body, my appearance, and perhaps even my identity were no longer entirely my own. Breakfast was no longer a casual affair. She had set the table meticulously. A small teacup, perfectly aligned utensils, a napkin folded with precise symmetry. Every detail felt intentional, as if my every movement and gesture were being watched, catalogued, measured. I moved with exaggerated care, aligning my hands, adjusting the hem of my skirt, straightening my posture, all the while aware that she was observing, judging, guiding me. Each adjustment felt unnatural, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to feel like a language I was learning, a set of rules I had never known but was beginning to understand. After breakfast, she handed me a small notebook. "Your routine," she said. "Every action, every thought, note it. This is how we measure progress." I held the notebook awkwardly, the pages crisp under my fingertips, and felt a surge of tension. Recording my own thoughts, my own fears, my own emerging identity, it was intimate, intrusive, necessary. The first entry I wrote was awkward, stilted, almost mechanical, but as I moved through the sentences, describing the way the fabric of my clothing felt, the way my body moved, the way my reflection seemed to observe me back, I felt a strange catharsis. It was as if putting my inner world onto paper allowed me to separate it from my fear, to examine it, to confront it. By mid-morning, she directed me to practice walking. She watched every step, her eyes sharp, yet patient. My gait was initially stiff, mechanical, as if each movement required conscious effort. My calves ached, my feet were sore, but I could feel the subtle curves of my body shifting with each step. I noticed the way my skirt swayed differently than trousers ever had, how the slight sway of my hips felt foreign yet strangely natural. Her corrections were precise, often silent, an adjustment of my wrist here, a soft touch on my shoulder there. But each one seemed to echo inside me, reinforcing her influence, guiding my transformation not just externally, but internally. Hours passed in this way, time blurring as I moved, adjusted, observed, and recorded. My reflection became both companion and interrogator, a mirror that refused to lie, that forced me to confront every nuance of this new self. At times, I recoiled, wishing to retreat to the familiar, to the identity I had clung to for so long. But other times, I found myself lingering, studying the contours of my body, the way the blouse's fabric curved, the gentle slope of my shoulders, and feeling an unfamiliar pride, a tentative acceptance of what I was becoming. By evening, exhaustion had settled deep into my muscles, yet my mind refused to rest. I sat in the quiet of the living room, clutching the small notebook, tracing my notes, reflecting on each movement, each sensation, each subtle emotion that had risen and fallen like waves throughout the day. I realized I had begun to anticipate her corrections, to internalize the standards she had set, to align my sense of self with the framework she imposed. And while there was fear, always fear, there was also a strange exhilaration, a thrill that came from surrendering control, from allowing myself to be reshaped. When she finally returned to check on me, her presence was soft but commanding. "You've done well today," she said, and for the first time her approval felt not like an evaluation but like recognition. I could see the subtle pride in her expression, the satisfaction in her posture. And yet, as comforting as it was, it also reminded me of the delicate balance I now inhabited, between fear and trust, between resistance and submission, between the familiar and the unfamiliar. I stood before the mirror one last time that evening, brushing the curls from my face, adjusting the hem of the skirt, noticing the small details that had once seemed trivial. The reflection staring back at me was no longer completely alien, though neither was it wholly my old self. It was a blend, a fusion of who I had been and who I was becoming, shaped by her guidance, her insistence, and the slow unraveling of the walls I had built around my identity. My fingers traced the curve of my jaw, the softness of my cheeks, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine that perhaps this new self could coexist with the old, that the boundaries between fear, shame, curiosity, and acceptance might blur into something unexpectedly whole. And as I finally lay back in the quiet darkness of my room, exhausted, tense, yet strangely alive, I realized that the journey had only just begun. Every movement, every thought, every reflection would be a step deeper into a world I had never entered willingly, but now, perhaps, one I could not turn away from. The soft click of the bathroom door closing behind me sounded louder than it should have, echoing off the tile walls in a way that made my chest tighten. The room smelled faintly of lavender, her lavender, which lingered everywhere she moved, leaving traces of herself like invisible breadcrumbs. I leaned against the cool sink, fingertips brushing the smooth porcelain, and tried to make sense of the pile of clothing she had left neatly folded on the counter. A skirt in soft gray, a blouse with delicate floral embroidery, and a pair of stockings so thin they seemed to float in the light. They weren't just clothes. They were a challenge, a command, an intrusion into a part of me I had never dared examine. Her instructions had been simple, delivered in that calm, unwavering tone that made arguing almost impossible. "Wear them. Follow the routine. Don't resist." At first, I thought it was a game, one of those subtle power plays we sometimes joked about. But now, standing here stripped of my usual confidence, I realized it was more than that. It was a test, and I didn't know if I could pass. I hesitated, letting my eyes roam over the garments. I could feel the weight of her gaze even though she was out of the room, like gravity pulling me toward the mirror I dreaded to meet. My hands shook slightly as they picked up the stockings. They felt impossibly delicate, yet there was a strange allure in their texture, a whisper of sensation that traveled up my fingers and made my pulse stutter. Sliding one over my calf, I felt the silk cling, the smoothness against my skin awakening something I didn't yet understand. My reflection was partially obscured by the soft shadow of the overhead light, but even in that dim glow, I could see a shift beginning, subtle at first. My legs, usually squared and unyielding, now looked almost fragile, the stockings emphasizing curves I hadn't noticed. I remembered a time when I had felt completely in control, balancing finances, managing our routines, planning our days with precision. Decisions, responsibilities, authority, they had been mine, comforting and absolute. But tonight, the illusion of that control had evaporated like mist. Every garment she had chosen, every instruction she had given, seemed designed to strip me not only of authority but of certainty itself. It was as if she had discovered the keys to a door I had kept locked for years, and was now inviting me, or forcing me, to step through it. By the time I tugged the stockings all the way up and smoothed them against my thighs, my breath had grown shallow. There was a strange tension coiling in my chest, equal parts fear and anticipation. I moved to the skirt next, hesitant, my fingers brushing the fabric, knotting the soft swish of material I had never worn. I hesitated before sliding it over my hips, feeling it settle around my waist, a gentle confinement that somehow felt revealing. My reflection shifted as the skirt touched my skin. I stared at the person in the mirror, someone familiar yet strange. My jawline, still firm, contrasted with the sudden softness of my posture. My shoulders seemed narrower, my stance smaller, almost cautious. I remembered her words from earlier, spoken with that same calm authority that had become my undoing. Pay attention to every detail. Every movement matters. And now, alone in the bathroom, I realized how meticulously she had orchestrated this. Even my hair had been subtly pinned and styled, soft curls framing my face in a way that made the reflection harder to recognize. I lifted a hand and touched my cheek, half expecting it to feel foreign. The skin was mine, of course, but the person it now framed felt like a stranger peeking through a familiar mask. When I moved to the blouse, my fingers trembling slightly, I felt a tension unlike any I had experienced before. Buttons that had always been trivial now demanded a precision I hadn't anticipated. Each one fastened was a small surrender, a concession that she was in control, that I was following a rhythm I had not created. The floral embroidery seemed to mock me, delicate and intricate, and I found myself tracing it with my fingertip, almost reverently. It was absurd, and I knew it, and yet I couldn't stop. By the time I finished dressing, every fiber of my being was buzzing with a strange mixture of apprehension and intrigue. I straightened, adjusted the hem of the skirt, and took a hesitant step toward the mirror. My reflection no longer looked like the man I had seen yesterday, or even this morning. The person staring back at me had a softness, a vulnerability that seemed entirely new. And yet, beneath it, there was a flicker of familiarity, a thread of myself I hadn't lost. I caught sight of my hands, slimmer, more delicate in appearance, and flexed my fingers, noting the almost imperceptible difference. My breathing hitched as I examined my face more closely. Her influence was evident in the details, the subtle curl of my hair, the gentle flush she had coaxed onto my cheeks, the quiet elegance of posture she had drilled into me without words. It was disorienting, beautiful, terrifying. For a long moment, I simply stood there, tracing the outline of my jaw with my thumb, feeling a shiver of something I couldn't name. Shame, curiosity, desire. It didn't matter, I was caught in a whirlwind of emotion too complex to untangle. And then she appeared at the doorway, smiling softly, a small purse in her hand. "You're ready," she said. Ready for what? I didn't know. Ready for her control, ready to confront the parts of myself I had ignored for years. The weight of her gaze was both reassuring and overwhelming. I reached for the purse, my fingers brushing hers, and felt a jolt of awareness. This small act, so simple in appearance, was loaded with meaning. It was a symbol of the new rhythm she was imposing, the boundaries she was setting, the transformation she had orchestrated. My chest tightened as I considered the hours, days, maybe weeks that would follow, each one a step further into this strange, uncharted territory. I sank to the floor, clutching the purse to my chest, and allowed myself a long, trembling exhale. Alone, yet not alone, I faced the reflection that no longer felt entirely foreign. The tension in my body didn't ease. It settled into something deeper, a quiet awareness that the world I had taken for granted was shifting beneath me. Every sensation, every brush of fabric, every reflection in the mirror was a reminder that I was no longer entirely the person I had been. And somewhere in the tangled mess of fear and exhilaration, I felt a spark of something entirely new. The first, fragile stirrings of acceptance, of curiosity, and perhaps even of understanding. The morning sun had barely begun to stretch across the horizon when I woke, stiff and sore in ways I didn't expect. My body remembered the exercises from yesterday, the careful posture, the slow, precise movements, but my mind felt even heavier than my muscles, weighed down by anticipation, anxiety, and something like dread disguised as curiosity. I traced my fingers along the soft fabric of the blouse, over the skirt, over the thin stockings that clung to my legs like a second skin, and I felt a shiver that was equal parts discomfort and fascination. Even in the still half-dark of my room, I could sense the change in myself. My reflection in the small oval mirror across the room seemed to watch me with quiet patience, a silent witness to my uncertainty. She entered without knocking, her footsteps light, deliberate. I could feel her presence before I heard her voice, a sensation that sent my stomach knotting. "Good morning," she said softly, but there was steel beneath the softness, a subtle authority that made me straighten instinctively, almost without thought. I knew this was no ordinary morning. There would be instructions, routines, corrections, and the underlying thread of control that had become the rhythm of my life. She handed me a list of tasks for the day, each item meticulously detailed, each one designed to enforce precision, grace, and awareness. It wasn't just chores. It was a regimen that demanded attention to every motion, every thought, every moment of self-presentation. Even the simplest actions, pouring tea, walking across the room, picking up a book, were now exercises in mindfulness, in discipline, in submission. I swallowed hard and nodded, feeling a rush of tension coil in my chest. Breakfast was silent, punctuated only by the subtle sounds of cutlery against porcelain and the occasional soft adjustment of my posture. I caught myself staring at my hands as I lifted the teacup. They seemed smaller, more delicate, the veins and knuckles less pronounced, almost foreign. My pulse quickened as I realized just how meticulously she had shaped every aspect of my presence, from the tilt of my chin to the weight of my movements. Each sip, each gesture, became a small act of compliance, a quiet acknowledgement of her control. After breakfast, she directed me to practice my walk again, this time in a full-length mirror that reflected every subtle shift in posture, balance, and grace. My first steps were rigid, unnatural, a stiff imitation of femininity that made my knees ache and my mind burn with self-consciousness. She circled me, her eyes sharp and observant, correcting a tilt of the wrist, the sway of the hips, the position of my shoulders. With every adjustment, I felt a mixture of embarrassment and strange exhilaration, as if each correction was both a rebuke and a recognition of potential. By the time she allowed me a break, I was drenched in sweat, trembling, but also keenly aware of my own body in ways I had never been before. When I returned to the bedroom, she handed me a brush and a small set of hairpins. "Your hair," she said simply. "Every curl, every strand matters." My fingers fumbled as I tried to follow her instructions, weaving the hair into soft loops and securing it in place. I caught my reflection midway through, and a pang of disbelief struck me. The face that stared back was both mine and not mine. Familiar features softened, eyes wider, posture smaller, expression tentative. A strange emotion surged through me, a mix of wonder, fear, and the faintest flicker of pride. I was becoming someone I had never known I could be. The afternoon brought another series of exercises, this time centered on voice and mannerisms. I had never realized how much my voice, the cadence of my words, the tilt of my head, and the rhythm of my gestures contributed to perception. She made me practice reading aloud, emphasizing gentle intonations, careful phrasing, and pauses that were precise yet natural. Every misstep elicited quiet correction, a soft but unmistakable redirection that made me feel both humbled and strangely attuned to the person I was shaping into. By evening, my voice had begun to carry a new cadence, one that felt unnatural in some ways, yet subtly comforting, as if the new self I was inhabiting was learning to assert itself. Meals, walks, and even the simplest household tasks became exercises in endurance, patience, and self-observation. I noticed the way the fabric of my blouse clung to my arms, the faint friction of the skirt at my thighs, the gentle pressure of the stockings along my calves. I noticed how my posture affected the way I moved through space, how each gesture could be soft or sharp, graceful or awkward. Each moment was a mirror, reflecting not just my appearance but my internal negotiation with identity, control, and acceptance. She introduced small punishments too, not cruel, not humiliating, but precise and intentional. A misaligned hem, a sloppy movement, an impatient gesture, each was met with gentle redirection, a required repetition, a lesson in mindfulness. And each time I felt a subtle shift within myself. The resistance that had once burned bright now flickered faintly, tempered by the realization that these exercises were not merely about appearance. They were about discipline, awareness, and an evolving sense of self. By nightfall, exhaustion pressed down like a heavy cloak, yet my mind refused to settle. I sat in the quiet, tracing my reflection in the mirror once again, noting the subtle curvature of my jaw, the softening of my cheeks, the way the clothing reshaped the lines of my body. Somewhere deep within, a tension had eased, a quiet acknowledgement that this new form, this guided self, was not entirely a loss. It was a strange reclamation, a discovery of capacities I had never acknowledged. I could sense the faintest stirrings of self-acceptance, a slow, fragile recognition that perhaps I could exist in both worlds, the familiar and the transformed. I traced the notebook on the bedside table, its pages filled with observations, frustrations, and tiny victories. Each line, each entry had become a bridge between fear and understanding, resistance and curiosity, shame and acknowledgement. And as I finally closed my eyes, body weary but mind alert, I realized that the journey she had begun was far from complete. Every day would be a negotiation, a test, a discovery, yet each step would carry me further into a version of myself I had never dared to imagine, and perhaps, I thought with a shiver that was both thrilling and terrifying, one I was beginning to inhabit willingly, if cautiously. The day began with the faint hum of the city outside my window, an unassuming sound that suddenly felt like a warning. I lay for a long moment in bed, feeling the subtle weight of my skirt against my thighs, the soft tug of the blouse at my shoulders, the friction of the stockings along my calves. Each sensation was amplified by my anxiety, each small movement a reminder that I was no longer fully in control. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the day ahead. Today, she had said, I would leave the house dressed fully as she commanded, walk through the neighborhood, and interact with the world as someone else. The world I knew, the one I had always taken for granted, suddenly felt foreign. Her voice came softly from the doorway, carrying authority wrapped in warmth. "Time to wake," she said, and it was impossible not to obey. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, feeling the tension coil in my stomach. The mirror caught my eye and I froze, tracing the lines of my reflection. Soft curls pinned carefully, blouse tucked precisely, skirt falling neatly, stockings smooth. My posture was measured, deliberate. I was someone else now, and yet I could still feel the threads of my old self beneath the surface, taut and quivering like hidden wires. Breakfast was quiet, meticulous, each movement observed, each bite measured. She instructed me on the smallest details, the way to lift my teacup, the angle of my wrist, the cadence of my speech. I obeyed, nodding every correction, internalizing every adjustment. My hands shook slightly as I poured the tea, a subtle tremor that I could feel but tried to hide. She didn't comment, only watched, and in that silence I understood that observation itself was a test. When it was time to leave, my stomach tightened. I felt the weight of the purse in my hand, a small but constant reminder of her control. She followed me to the door, adjusting a curl here, straightening my blouse there, checking my posture one last time. I could feel my heart hammering, my pulse racing, as I stepped into the world beyond the threshold. Every step on the pavement was an exercise in awareness, a negotiation between fear and curiosity. People passed by, some glancing, some not, and I felt every gaze like a measurement, every perception a potential judgment. I noticed the subtle sway of my skirt with each step, the friction of the stockings, the way my shoes forced a slight change in gait. Every sensation was amplified, each movement deliberate, rehearsed, and scrutinized. My reflection in shop windows startled me at first. The person staring back was delicate, careful, poised, yet beneath the surface, I felt the old self, the one who had always been confident, commanding, lurking, watching, resisting. The clash of identities was dizzying, an undercurrent of tension that made my chest tighten and my palms sweat. A passerby smiled briefly as I adjusted my purse. My body reacted before my mind did. A small nod, a soft smile, posture stiffening. My stomach knotted, but a strange thrill pulsed through me. I was performing, yes, but also existing in a new reality, one that demanded careful observation of every detail of myself. Each glance, each subtle movement, became a lesson in awareness. Each step reinforced the fragile thread of self-discipline that had been instilled over the last days. At a cafe, I hesitated at the door. The thought of interacting with the barista, of voicing my order, of allowing someone else to see me fully in this form, sent a shiver down my spine. She had instructed me beforehand: posture upright, voice soft but clear, gestures precise, movements deliberate. I felt her words echoing in my mind as I stepped inside, feeling the weight of every gaze. The barista smiled, asked my order, and I realized my voice carried a different cadence, controlled, careful, softer than my usual tone. I noted it silently, a mix of embarrassment and fascination twisting inside me. Outside the cafe, I walked more slowly, tracing each movement, noticing the texture of the air, the hum of traffic, the faint brush of wind against my skin. Each step was deliberate, each posture intentional. And yet, even as I practiced these small gestures, doubts crept in. Who was I now? Who was I becoming? Was the person in the mirror, the soft curl-framed face, the delicate stance, the careful gestures, truly me, or merely a performance I could never own? Returning home, I felt a strange exhaustion, a mental fatigue deeper than any physical tiredness I had ever known. She was waiting at the door, calm, observant. "You handled yourself well," she said. Her praise, gentle but precise, carried a weight I couldn't deny. And yet, even as relief softened my tension, a new awareness arose. The awareness that this transformation was not just about appearances, but about the subtle reshaping of identity, the quiet rewiring of self-perception. In the afternoon, she had me practice my daily routines again, cleaning, organizing, adjusting my clothing, walking through the house with measured steps, observing the mirror with meticulous attention. Every mistake, every lapse in posture, every hesitation was met with correction, not harsh but undeniable. The process was exhausting, yet hypnotic. I found myself internalizing her guidance, slowly adopting her standards, blending my awareness with hers. It was a delicate dance of control and surrender, of resistance and compliance. By evening, I was seated with the notebook, tracing my entries, reflecting on every subtle observation. The mirror became both confidant and interrogator. I could see the faint softness of my jaw, the subtle curves of my posture, the gentle sway of my skirt as I moved. Each detail was a testament to the slow, deliberate shaping I had undergone. And yet, even as acceptance flickered, a whisper of resistance remained. The journey was far from complete, each day another test, each movement another negotiation of identity. I closed the notebook, feeling the quiet pulse of awareness in every fiber of my being. My reflection stared back, no longer entirely alien, yet not wholly mine. I was suspended between worlds, the old self, confident, commanding, precise, and the new self, delicate, observant, vulnerable, yet quietly strong in its own way. And in that tension, I felt the fragile thrill of discovery, of exploration, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginnings of true acceptance. The morning arrived with the usual hush of half-light filtering through the curtains, yet this morning felt heavier, more deliberate, charged with a tension that had begun to hum through my bones like electricity. I lay still for longer than I should have, tracing the edge of the blanket with a fingertip, feeling the gentle friction of the skirt against my thighs, the soft pull of the blouse at my shoulders, the delicate scrape of stockings over skin. Every sensation was magnified, intensified by the awareness that today she expected more than obedience. She expected precision, awareness, and a further surrender of the rigid control I had clung to for so long. My mind flickered over yesterday's exercises, the subtle corrections, the glances from strangers, the exact cadence of my voice, the sway of my hips. Everything had been observed, noted, internalized. Today, I had to embody it fully, carry this self into a world that did not bend to instruction or habit. I rose slowly, each movement careful, deliberate. My hands smoothed the skirt over my thighs, tugged slightly at the blouse, adjusted a curl of hair that had fallen loose. In the mirror, my reflection caught me off guard. The soft curls framed a face that was mine and not mine. My jawline retained its familiar angle, yet beneath the smooth slope of my cheeks, beneath the alert gaze of my eyes, there was a delicacy, a tension, a subtle awareness that I had never carried before. I flexed my fingers, knotting the contours, the subtle refinement of hands shaped by both guidance and observation. Even standing, I felt smaller, lighter, yet strange currents of confidence lingered beneath the new fragility. She entered the room without a word, her presence alone commanding a stillness I could not break. "Are you ready?" Her voice was calm, soft, but threaded with authority. I nodded, feeling the coil of nervous anticipation twist in my stomach. Today, she said, we would go further, beyond mirrors, beyond the home, into the streets, into the eyes of strangers, into the judgment and observation of the world. I could feel my pulse accelerate, a tightness in my chest, a nervous awareness threading into every movement, every breath. Breakfast was meticulous, ritualized. Each motion measured, lifting the teacup with a precise tilt, aligning the wrist at the exact angle, settling shoulders just so. She observed me silently, correcting a tilt of the head, a bend of the elbow, the faint tension in my back. I obeyed every gesture deliberate, nodding each correction and storing it, internalizing it. Shame and pride tangled together in my chest. The shame came from the awareness that my body, my posture, my expression were no longer entirely my own. The pride came from the delicate mastery that came with each successful adjustment. Every swallow, every movement was amplified in my consciousness, a mirror of obedience and awareness. When we finally left the house, stepping onto the pavement, the cool morning air struck me sharply, brushing through curls of hair, tugging faintly at the blouse and skirt, whispering against the delicate friction of stockings. I could feel every inch of fabric, every fold, every line in my awareness. The city hummed around us, indifferent, yet every passerby became magnified in my perception. A nod, a glance, a curious smile, a faint frown, all became tests, measures of composure, mirrors of perception. My steps were deliberate, careful, rehearsed, each movement measured, each sway of my hips, each lift of the foot, each subtle adjustment of shoulders meticulously attended to. We passed a small cafe. She instructed me to order, to carry myself fully, to maintain poise, voice soft but confident, gestures delicate, movements precise. I felt my chest tighten as I approached, imagining judgment in every eye, every casual glance. My voice came out measured, soft, deliberate, each word precisely articulated as she had instructed. The barista smiled, casually polite, yet every motion, every glance, every response felt amplified in my consciousness. My stomach twisted, a shiver of tension and exhilaration running through me as I realized I was performing, yes, but inhabiting this new self with increasing awareness. Each gesture, each posture, each word became an act of presence, of learning, of subtle surrender to this carefully guided identity. We continued walking, the city streets alive with movement and noise. Each passerby became a point of awareness, each glance a subtle test of my poise. Children stared curiously, adults glanced politely, and I noted every reaction, every microexpression, internalizing the ways I needed to move, speak, breathe, and align myself. I felt the sway of the skirt at every step, the subtle tension in the stockings, the gentle pressure of the purse against my side, the alignment of my shoulders, the lift of my chin. Every sensation became a lesson, a calibration, a test of endurance and precision. By midday, I felt exhaustion setting in, a deep, almost aching fatigue, yet my mind remained hyperconscious, taut with awareness. She guided me through exercises in posture, subtle shifts of weight, gestures, and voice. A casual misstep, a wrist lifted too sharply, a stride misaligned was corrected gently but insistently. I repeated movements, adjusted posture, refined gestures over and over, muscles burning, consciousness stretched to the limits of focus. The tension in my chest and neck was relentless, yet there was a strange thrill in the precision, a subtle exhilaration in the mastery of awareness. At a small park, we paused, and she instructed me to interact with strangers, to navigate casual exchanges with soft confidence, to maintain elegance in speech and gesture, to inhabit the persona fully. Each greeting, each acknowledgement, each small interaction was measured, observed, absorbed. A slight hesitation, a poorly timed gesture, a misaligned posture, all were noted, corrected, internalized. I felt the shifting of identity with every small encounter, a layering of precision and self-awareness, a blending of obedience and personal inhabitation. Hours passed in this rhythm, walking, pausing, adjusting, observing, internalizing, recording observations in my notebook. The sway of skirts, the friction of stockings, the alignment of shoulders, the tilt of the chin, the cadence of speech, the reactions of strangers. Every sensory detail magnified, the texture of fabrics, the weight of shoes, the brush of air against skin, the sound of footsteps, the quiet hum of voices around me, the subtle pressure of the purse against my side. Each sensation became a point of reflection, a lesson, a reminder of guidance and transformation. Returning home, the evening was a series of precise, deliberate exercises: hair adjustment, posture practice, voice modulation, deliberate movement through the house. Every reflection in the mirror was a confrontation, every gesture a calibration. I traced the lines of my jaw, the gentle curves of my shoulders, the sway of the skirt, the alignment of hands and fingers, flexing, observing, refining. My mind cataloged every motion, every shift in perception, every flicker of emotion. Exhaustion pressed against my body, heavy in muscles and bones, yet my consciousness remained alert, meticulous, alive. Finally, I sat with the notebook, recording every detail, every nuance, every emotion. The friction of stockings, the sway of the skirt, the cadence of speech, the alignment of shoulders, the subtle gestures, the internal reflections on identity, fear, shame, pride, curiosity, and the faintest glimmer of acceptance. I wrote until my hand ached, my eyes blurred, yet I could not stop. Each stroke of the pen, each word, each description was both anchor and reflection, capturing a self in transition, a mind stretched taut with observation, a body learning to inhabit a new rhythm. At night before the mirror, I allowed myself to linger. The reflection staring back was neither wholly alien nor wholly familiar. The curls framed a delicate face. The posture was precise, deliberate, aware. The sway of the skirt, the alignment of hands, the cadence of breath, the subtle gestures, all bore the mark of guidance and internalization. And yet beneath it, I could feel the remnants of the old self, confident, commanding, precise, layered beneath a delicate, deliberate awareness. In that tension, I felt a fragile thrill of recognition, the first quiet stirrings of acceptance, of inhabitation, of potential ownership of this carefully guided, delicately realized identity. I flexed my hands, traced the lines of my jaw, adjusted the folds of my skirt, and breathed deeply. The journey was far from complete, the path ahead long, rigorous, uncertain. But in that moment, I sensed a quiet merging of self and guidance, control and surrender, old and new, fear and curiosity. And in that realization, I allowed a small, trembling smile to settle across my lips, acknowledging the struggle, the transformation, and the person I was learning to inhabit, cautiously, deliberately, and perhaps, for the first time, fully. The first light of dawn crept in softly through the blinds, thin fingers of gold brushing across the floor, and I lay motionless, listening to the subtle rhythm of the house, the creak of floorboards, the distant hum of a car engine on the street, the faint rustle of curtains. I felt the fabric of my skirt against my thighs, the gentle pull of the blouse at my shoulders, the smooth scrape of the stockings along my calves, every detail amplified in a way that made my body feel heightened, conscious, painfully aware. It was as though each thread, each fold, each texture was whispering to me, reminding me that today was another test, another chapter in a transformation that had been building steadily, silently for days. I drew a slow breath, tasting the cool morning air, and realized my chest felt tight not from fatigue, but from anticipation, a taut coil wound tight in my stomach. Her footsteps were soft but unmistakable as she appeared in the doorway, eyes scanning me in a way that sent a shiver through my spine. "Time to rise," she said, calm and deliberate, yet her tone carried the subtle authority that had become the axis of my world. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, feeling the tension in my calves as the stockings brushed my skin. I adjusted the hem of my skirt, tugged the blouse slightly, ran a hand over my curls, brushing them back into place. The mirror across the room caught my reflection immediately. The face staring back was both familiar and utterly transformed. The jaw softened, cheeks subtly flushed, eyes alert and wide. My shoulders bore the delicate weight of posture she had drilled into me, the curves of my body gentle yet deliberate, a new elegance I had never experienced. Breakfast was ritualized, meticulous. Each movement, lifting the teacup, tilting my wrist, aligning my shoulders, breathing evenly, was measured, deliberate, exact. She watched silently, correcting the faintest misalignment, a wrist too stiff, a spine slightly curved, an elbow too angled. Every correction carried the quiet authority of mastery, and every adjustment I obeyed left a subtle imprint on my mind, threading through my consciousness. Shame, pride, tension, exhilaration. Every emotion tangled in my chest like a tightly wound coil, tightening and loosening with each sip of tea, each measured gesture. When we stepped outside, the air struck me sharply, brushing through curls, tugging faintly at the blouse and skirt, tickling my calves beneath the stockings. Each step I took was deliberate, conscious. The sway of the skirt, the lift of my chin, the placement of each foot, every motion was magnified in awareness. Passers-by passed without noticing, yet each glance, each movement, each flicker of attention I imagined felt like an examination, a subtle test. I adjusted my posture repeatedly, subtly, almost unconsciously. My hands clutched the purse in a precise manner, shoulders lifted, spine aligned. Every detail mattered. Every movement was a negotiation of self, a careful weaving of instruction, observation, and internalized guidance. We passed a small cafe, and she instructed me to enter, maintain poise, order my drink, and observe. My chest tightened. My voice emerged soft, measured, deliberate, each word precise, each gesture careful. The barista smiled, casually polite, but in my mind every reaction was magnified. I adjusted my stance, subtly shifted the purse, aligned my posture, and felt the tremor of tension and exhilaration race through my body. Each movement, each gesture, became both a mirror and a lesson, an exploration of presence, an observation of self, an immersion in the delicate art of inhabiting this transformed identity. Hours passed with relentless attention, walking, pausing, observing, recording in my notebook every minute sensation. The friction of stockings, the sway of the skirt, the weight of the purse, the subtle tilt of the chin, the cadence of speech, the reactions of strangers. I noticed the way sunlight glinted off a building, the hum of tires on the pavement, the sound of leaves brushing against a fence. Each detail became magnified, each moment a lesson in awareness. Even the slightest misalignment of posture, the smallest hesitation in movement, became a point of correction, a reminder of control, a subtle reshaping of self. By mid-afternoon, I felt a fatigue that was physical, emotional, and mental, pressed into my muscles, threaded through my spine, weighted on my shoulders. Yet my mind remained acute, alert, stretching to catalog every gesture, every sensation, every fleeting emotion. She guided me through exercises in posture, movement, gestures, voice, and reflection. A slip, a hand lifted too quickly, a stride misaligned, a tilt of the chin that was off, was corrected gently but firmly, each repetition imprinting the new awareness deeper, threading it into my consciousness, into the fragile tapestry of identity she had begun to weave. We stopped at a park, and she instructed me to interact with strangers, to navigate social exchanges with soft confidence, gestures deliberate, movements precise. A child glanced at me with curiosity. I returned a gentle smile, posture aligned, hand movements delicate, voice measured. An older woman passed by, nodding. I inclined my chin subtly, breathing slowly, maintaining poise. Each interaction, no matter how fleeting, was recorded internally, examined, analyzed, and stored. My reflection in every window, every glass, every surface became a companion, a mirror to my inner self, forcing me to confront both fear and exhilaration simultaneously. As the day stretched on, I moved through streets, plazas, and alleys with heightened awareness. The sway of the skirt, the friction of stockings, the gentle tug of the blouse, the alignment of shoulders, the tilt of the chin, the cadence of my voice, all became ritual meditation practice. Each person I passed, each gesture I made, each subtle movement of the hands or feet carried weight and meaning, threading my consciousness into a tapestry of awareness and presence that I had never before experienced. My internal dialogue spiraled endlessly. Who am I now? Who am I becoming? Can I inhabit this self fully and still retain the threads of the old confidence, the old strength? Returning home, evening pressed in with long shadows and fading light. She guided me through the final exercises, adjusting hair and clothing, practicing posture, softening gestures, refining the cadence of speech, observing every detail in the mirror. I traced the contours of my jaw, the slope of shoulders, the gentle sway of the skirt, the delicate alignment of hands and fingers. I flexed my hands, turned my head slightly, observed the reflection of eyes that were both mine and not mine. The tension of the day was embedded in every muscle, yet beneath the fatigue, a strange exhilaration pulsed, quiet but insistent. Finally, I sat with the notebook. I wrote for hours, capturing every sensation, every reflection, every tremor of tension, every flicker of pride, every wave of embarrassment, every heartbeat, every breath, every careful movement that had defined the day. I traced the friction of stockings, the sway of skirts, the tilt of my chin, the weight of the purse, the cadence of my voice, the subtle gestures of hands and shoulders. Every line, every word, became both reflection and record, anchor and meditation, a testament to the painstaking, delicate, continuous work of inhabiting this new self. Night fell, quiet, heavy, and still. I stood before the mirror, letting my eyes travel over the reflection slowly, deliberately, as though memorizing each line, curve, and nuance. The soft curls framed a face delicate, attentive, aware. Shoulders aligned, posture precise, gestures intentional, hair perfectly adjusted, hands relaxed yet refined. Beneath it all, I could feel the echoes of the old self. Confidence, strength, presence, certainty, layered beneath the new delicacy, the awareness, the heightened perception that had been instilled in me. I flexed my fingers, adjusted my posture, breathed deeply, and allowed myself a moment of quiet, trembling acknowledgement. I was both old and new, fragile and deliberate, observed and aware, a self in transition, a tapestry of guidance, obedience, awareness, and tentative ownership. And in that moment, as the house settled into deep silence, I realized that the journey, long, arduous, delicate, transformative, had led me here, to a fragile, luminous place where fear and pride, obedience and awareness, old confidence and new presence coexisted. I allowed a trembling smile to touch my lips, a quiet acknowledgement of the struggle, the learning, the transformation, and the self I was finally beginning to inhabit fully, deliberately, consciously, and perhaps, at last, with acceptance.